Good morning, everyone. I am Ernesto Burden, the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review, and I am delighted to welcome you to our webinar today, Optimizing Support for Mental Health in Today's Workplace. We are in an era of unprecedented mental health stressors, and our panelists are going to talk a little bit about that and about, just as importantly, what employers can and should be doing to support their employees' mental health needs in and out of the workplace. We're sponsored today by the Center for Life Management, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, a Point 32 health company, and United Healthcare. And so let's meet our panelists for today. We'll be talking with Kim Heiser, Director of Client Management from Optum Behavioral Health, the Behavioral Health Division of United Healthcare, Steve Arnault, Vice President of Clinical Services, Quality and Compliance at the Center for Life Management, and Jill Borelli, Vice President of Behavioral Health, Point 32 Health, which is the parent company to Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. And with that, we're going to hear from Kim first. So Kim, please turn on your camera and join us. Also, as Kim is coming on board here, a note for the audience, we will be taking questions. Feel free to type them into the questions section of your chat, and we'll take them after each of the panelists has had a chance to give us their overview of where we stand with mental health in the workplace. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Ernesto. So I just wanted to share a few slides, really focusing on anxiety and managing anxiety. If we can pop to the next slide, please. So occasional anxiety is an expected part of life, and everyone gets worried and anxious sometimes. I think that people with anxiety disorders experience more than normal everyday anxiety and worry. It doesn't go away. So I think the main thing that we need to be concerned about is it something that we can manage or is it not? So the physical symptoms that are shown, like the racing heart, the sweating, shaking hands, shortness of breath, a lot of times we present in the medical community first. And that's why, when we go for physicals, that type of thing, they're starting to ask questions, right, for depression, anxiety. So when we really look at, I've been having stomach issues, it's really manifesting in the physical side, but what we're really dealing with is a behavioral health issue. And so anxiety can present many different ways. There's those emotional symptoms that are listed here, as well as some physical symptoms. So can we go ahead and pop to the next slide as well, please? So really looking at avenues to decrease anxious thoughts. And from a personal perspective, I think that this is very individualized. So I know for many, right, looking at a picture of their baby or their children, because that brings happiness to them, or it can also bring anxiety at certain points. So we really need to focus on what it is that we can find in our life that can help decrease those anxious thoughts. So listening to music, many people do that, right? Classical music, they've done studies where they've implemented classical music in bus stations, bus stops, where people are sitting there to just try and bring that calmness to folks. And then, smell, right? We definitely, all of our senses can come into play here with things that relax us, that decrease that anxiety. And I think my number one personal decrease in anxiety is my dog. And I know that many people are on board with me there, because animals can certainly provide that sense of calmness, that sense of happiness. So when we're able to shift or focus on one of these 5 different ways, it's incredibly helpful for folks to start getting into a routine of understanding what works for them to decrease that anxiety. Next slide, please. And then these are just some self-care strategies that one can focus on, and some tips for taking care of your mental health. And I think the number one thing here, again, for me from a clinical perspective, is really focusing on what you can control. I think many of us get in the reactionary mode. Life is crazy, right? We are running Mach 1. We're reacting to everything. So really try and take that control back, be more proactive in what you can do in your life and what you can do to focus on decreasing the anxiety and stress. on both a personal and professional level. And then I think the other thing too is to really like set those goals, set your priorities out there. But the other thing too is step away from technology sometimes. You know, we are inundated with our phones, the news, and that can create anxiety in itself. So again, I think going back to focusing on what we can control, and you absolutely have the ability to turn that off, put it down. I mean, I think that we talk to our children about that all the time. So I think as parents and adults, it's very important for us to focus on that as well. All right, and I think that was the end of my slideshow, Ernesto.
Thank you, Kim. Next, we're going to hear from Jill Borelli. Jill, please turn on your camera and join us.
Hi. First of all, I'm delighted to be here, and I think this is such an important conversation that we're having, and one that we need to have all the time in many, many different settings. I just want to say a little bit about me and my company, the organization that I represent, and sort of the journey that we're on, because I think that ties very much to the larger topic. So as in the announcement, in the introductions, announced that I work for I'm the Vice President of Behavioral Health at Point 32 Health, which is the new organization founded by the combination of Harvard Pilgrim Health Plan and Tufts Health Plan, and two iconic New England nonprofit health plans coming together with 90 years plus of experience and service to members. And one of the gifts of this kind of a combination is that we really got to think hard about what were our priorities as a new organization, and behavioral health is clearly one of our top priorities. And while we're thinking about behavioral health, what we're really doing is thinking about it in the context of whole person care. I think it's very important that as we talk and think about mental health or behavioral health, we are also recognizing that our heads and bodies are attached, and that by separating, if we think about them as two separate paths to health and wellness, we miss out on some opportunities. We know that during the height of the pandemic, the CDC added behavioral health conditions as one of the conditions placing people at higher risk for severe COVID-19, based on studies published by the Journal of the American Medicine Association. And that we also know that people who have chronic medical conditions are at significantly higher risk for comorbid behavioral health. Like I said, heads and bodies are attached. It makes sense, as mental health issues are part of the human condition. And if we as a culture don't acknowledge that and talk about that, given the long history of stigma associated with behavioral health, we're really cheating everyone and ourselves in terms of the conversation. Caring for your mental health is equally as important as caring for your physical health. So there's a great quote from C.S. Lewis, who says that mental pain is no less dramatic than physical pain, but it is more common and also more hard to bear. The frequent attempt to conceal mental pain increases the burden. It is so much easier to say, my tooth is aching, rather than to say, my heart is broken. And I think thinking about that and how that impacts all of us every day, we have all been, in the last few years, through incredibly stressful times. We're still there. And history has shown with mental health that once the trigger goes away, so although people are, although we're not confined to our homes in the same way, we're not dealing with the pandemic in the same way, once the trigger goes away, it doesn't mean the long-term impacts of behavioral health and the stress that we've all experienced goes away as well. So I think in terms of thinking about how we care for ourselves, how we care for our families, how we care for our colleagues in the work setting, is to make sure that the behavioral health is considered an equally important conversation when thinking about someone's overall well-being. And one of the things at our organization that we've done very intentionally is we have a sort of phrase that we say we all do BH, and so that we've really tried to have, we're working to have behavioral health be integrated into every part of the organization, both in terms of how we engage with our customers, our members, providers, employer groups, all of that, but also how we engage with each other, that it has to be part of the conversation for all of us to be functioning at our highest levels. I think that's for me, all for me.
Thank you very much. What a beautiful quote from C.S. Lewis. I think that really helps to put into perspective the scope of the challenge that individuals face, and of course, all of the organizations to which they belong face by proxy. Next up, Steve Arnault. Steve, please join us.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, and I'm glad we're talking about this important subject today. I work at Center for Life Management, which is one of 10 mental health centers in the state of New Hampshire. Over the last couple of years through the pandemic, the system has seen a dramatic increase in people seeking help at a time when my industry, like a lot of yours, is also facing workforce shortages. So the people aren't getting the help that they need, which is trickling into the workplace. A couple of things I want to address today. So one is the concept of stigma. So there is as most of you know, a stigma attached to mental health issues. And when that stigma translates into the workplace, it can have a deterrent effect on people seeking help. So one of the ways to combat that within the workplace is to look at all aspects of your agency. How does your insurance coverage for your employees handle mental health issues? Is there parity with medical issues? That's an important place to start. How does your HR department handle someone who's coming with mental health issues? Is it addressed the same way as someone coming with cancer or diabetes or some other medical condition? Are stressors talkable within a supervisory relationship? When people talk about what's going on with them at home, how it affects the workplace in a safe, secure environment? You often hear these days people talking about work-life balance. That's become very important, at least in my experience, within the current workforce that we're dealing with. There's been as you all know, there's been a change in workforce in terms of people who are not engaged at work, people aren't working. There's a trend of people actually leaving work on the spot, resigning, not because they don't like the job, but because they can't handle what's going on at home and be effective at work. So making these issues talkable and having a organizational response, I think, is huge. And that's going to depend on your organization, obviously, in terms of what you do, what your culture is. Most of us are in an environment now that is hybrid, that wasn't a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic. That's caused some really interesting things to happen within the workforce. So you've got people that are home 5 days a week, or people that are home 2 days in the office 3 days a week. And there's a social disconnection that's occurred. So there's no more walking down the hallway and saying, hi, how's your weekend, or chat over the coffee pot. Those small incremental social interactions are missing, and people are feeling increasingly isolated because of that. So trying to figure out a way to engage people socially through work, I think, is kind of becoming an important aspect of keeping people healthy and keeping people in the workforce. Having said that, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about things to look for in your colleagues and your employees that may be a sign or a signal of some kind of mental health or behavioral health issues. So the first kind of global thing is a change in behavior. So if you know your employees and you know their work ethic and you know how they present themselves. If you notice changes, even subtle changes, those can be a flag. So things like increase in absenteeism, people just not showing up. People that are late for meetings, webinars, Zoom meetings, that type of thing. People that are generally prepared, who show up unprepared on a regular basis. Or people that just aren't engaged. They're not engaged in conversation. Maybe if they're in a Zoom meeting, they're shutting their cameras off. Or an increase in sick time is also a flag. And these can be flags of anxiety, it can be flags of depression. It could also be flags of substance abuse. One of the alarming trends that I did a little research before this webinar, I found that alcohol consumption in New Hampshire over the past 2 years has increased by 14%. Well, you might say, well, 14% isn't that much, but actually New Hampshire is the highest alcohol consumption per capita in the country at 14.17 gallons a year. It's a lot of alcohol. And more alarming is the increase in women using alcohol in New Hampshire. It went up by 41% over the course of the pandemic. So these are the people we work with. These are the people that are our colleagues. And this is affecting them personally and professionally. So with that, I just want to shift gears a little bit. Once you've identified the signs and symptoms, what do you do about that? If you have an EAP, Employee Assistance Program, having people go to an EAP is the first blush. Referring them to the local mental health center, even though there's a backlog, I think is worth it. There's also, if people are in crisis, there are numbers to call that we can get into later in the webinar. Ernesto, I think that's my preamble. Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much. And please, everybody on the call, jump back in and let's move to a discussion here. I know I have questions after all of your initial statements. And again, I urge listeners to chime in with your own questions as well. I'd like to start just by asking, and I think asking all of you, this is appropriate to all of you in the different roles that you have. You mentioned, each one of you mentioned the various things that can be done both to identify when somebody might be having a problem, but also what signs and symptoms are of a problem that somebody might identify in themselves. Kim, for example, you talked about anxiety and the different tools that people can use to cope with that anxiety. And the first thing I wondered, because you see a wide array of businesses dealing with these problems with their employees, what are they doing? Like, what are some practical things businesses are doing? And to use an example, Kim, you mentioned, sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch as ways that people can calm their own anxieties. Are any businesses or institutions sort of looking at that and saying, how do we build an environment, or how do we build a climate, or how do we build a culture that just sort of naturally supports mental health? I know, in the marketing world, restaurants have done that for years, not necessarily to support mental health, but to design color schemes and things that make people either want to stay or make them want to eat quickly and go quickly. So what are businesses doing? And the question's open to all.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in real quick. So I think, to Steve's point, when he was talking about what are companies offering their employees, right? I think right now, one of the biggest deterrents, as Steve also said, is backlog, right? Ability to get into care, access to care. So I think clearly a lot of organizations are implementing those mindful meditations, the opportunity to have a quiet space within their organization to allow their employees to go. If they happen to have like an on-site EAP consultant, or who maybe runs those groups, right, a couple of times a week, and employees are invited to come to those. I know on our behavioral health side, we offer Live and Work Well site, which there actually are mindful meditations on there. So just for people to just take that time visually and just auditorily disconnect, decrease that stress level. I kind of feel like we have options, right, across a continuum. We always talk about that continuum of care. And I think it's important to know that one size doesn't fit all. Access points are different for everyone. We've got the younger population, millennials, that are more apt for online digital app options, where we've got senior folks in our workforce that really want that brick and mortar care. They want to go in, have that handshake, be face to face with someone. So what we're trying to do is really offer that full continuum. So whatever entry point, access point for our members, we're able to accommodate. And I think early entry education and digital apps, to the coaching, to the virtual therapy or brick and mortar therapy, to residential care and psychiatric med management, as well as medication assisted treatment. So that's what we're targeting across the board to really address all those entry points for our members.
Yeah, can I just add, I think that's exactly right. The one size fits all, one size does not fit all. And people, like with any health condition, there's an acuity spectrum. And what you want to make sure for your employees is that there are the right places to connect along that acuity spectrum, from digital apps through in-person care. But I also think, just sort of adding on to something Steve had said too, is I do think this environment, and particularly the hybrid work environment, challenges us to be intentional. And so while I'm in my office today, but a lot of my colleagues are not there, including many of the people on my team. So, but you need to be intentional in terms of how you are talking to people, checking in, not just, heads down work, but also who we are as people in the larger context of our life. Work is a huge part, but the relationships are also very important, and very important in terms of people's feeling supported, engaged, and understood. And the other thing I want to say is that there are one bad day, right? I think people get a little nervous going back to the stigma about what is mental health and what, in terms of knowing when and how and if you need to engage in treatment. And I think it's really important to say one bad day or a few bad days. That's just part of being human. That's part of being human. It doesn't mean you shouldn't take care of yourself in all the ways Kim listed, as well as many other ones. But really, if it's that level of distress continues over days, weeks, months, that's an indication to yourself that you might need higher or more intensive services. And I think we have to give ourselves permission to have bad days, and we need to give our employees permission to have bad days, and recognize that as in the context of their overall care. Like, you wouldn't, Ernesto and I spoke before this webinar, and we were talking about a particular situation. If someone had a panic attack, right? This is not uncommon. You would not expect that. If someone, that is an acute condition, right? That there's lots of ways to take care of yourself in that moment that reduces your symptoms. You would expect that you would hope someone would take the time to address that. Much like if someone had acute appendicitis, you would not say to them, like, power through, suck it up, all that kind of thing. You'd say, go take care of yourself and then come back. Because again, it's an acute episode that has a treatment that will ameliorate the distress. And I think thinking about BH and mental health, and I kind of use those terms interchangeably, as in that context of, it is something that happens to all of us. We all get stomach bugs. We all have bad days. We all have anxiety. And then understanding the right kind of intervention with your employees and your colleagues throughout, based on that situation.
Thank you. Steve?
Well, there's a lot to unpack with what they both just said. I think I can only put a finer point on it. They're right. So there's a continuum of interventions. There's a continuum of mental health conditions, all of which are very human and very common. And I think if the workplace acknowledges that and creates an environment where it's talkable, where having a supervisor say, take a vacation day, head on home, give me a call in the morning, tell me how you're doing, goes a very long way to keeping people in the workforce and keeping them healthy. The other piece here is kind of backing up a little bit into what the workplace can do. As Kim and Jill were talking, they made a little list here of all the things that we did over the last couple of years. And the major theme was trying to maintain a sense of connection with the employees, right? So the world stopped, everybody went remote, and we're slowly getting back in, and we tried a number of different things, but it was all about being connected. And our agency just did a pretty expensive employee engagement survey to try to get a handle on where we are now. And overridingly, the theme was people wanted to be connected. They wanted to be back in. So we are doing a lot of things outside of work tasks to get people connected. We have people going out to dinner. We have people doing games in our parking lot, taking an afternoon. We have whatever the employees wanted to do to feel connected. And the results have been absolutely outstanding. People are more engaged. They feel like they're part of a broader community. So I think, again, it's going to be different for every setting, but I think taking a look at that type of thing is really important.
Yeah, I also think the age of, like where people are professionally in their career too. And I think my son is 25. He moved to LA during the pandemic and works for a law firm in DC. And he recently told me this story, like he felt a little bad for his big boss, as he referred to him, because he had said, oh, there's cookies in the break room. And all his colleagues who live all over the country were like, I'm in LA, I'm in whatever. And so I think we have to be really creative about engagement and that hybrid, how we invite people back, but how we also make sure people who aren't back because they live somewhere else, which now happens in a way that never did before, certainly for my company. Like how do we engage people in those ways too, and the conversations that matter, right, in terms of how they're functioning, and I think Steve, you had said work-life balance is a very overused expression, and I think it's even more poignant today because when people are working in your home, it's really hard to achieve that balance when you're always at work and you're always at home. And so how do you intentionally create the space for those splits in time, boundaries around what is home and what is work, and also recognize what people want and need. I know from my son and other, I have a lot of 20-somethings that work on my team, like the idea of how they experience the office is very different because honestly, if you're 25 or 26, most of your work career post-college, if you went to college, has been remotely. And so I think we have to be creative about those conversations. Again, and creative about how we engage people talking about their mental health and wellness in these kind of hybrid settings. Because connection is hugely important, regardless of how you're engaging.
That makes me think of the, I think you had used the word or intentionality about connection. And I think I saw a piece in Harvard Business Review a week or two ago that was talking about what supervisors can do. And it was recommending calling it, just doing a regular check-in with remote staffs that isn't a formal meeting and isn't a long thing. It's a 5-minute hello. And I thought that was interesting. I'm wondering if you're seeing things like that being implemented in organizations as sort of managerial standard procedures.
I think that's interesting. One of the things that we noted at the supervisory level where I work is that because most people are remote, we know everybody's kids now. Which is probably a common thing, right? So, I mean, when I log on to have supervision with one of my staff, I'm waving to the daughter, I'm asking her how it's going with school, she's showing me a drawing. That would have been unconscionable 5 years ago, right? But now it's a norm, and I think it's a good norm. The kids have been taught to say hi to Steve and then go play or whatever, and it works. It keeps us connected. I have a broader relationship with the people I work with, and I think that, like I said, that goes a long way.
And I think, Ernesto, from an organizational perspective, that leaders have to be aware that many of their management staff, supervision staff, they're working in a whole new territory as well, right? They're going from having a staff that was in front of them. They had their 20-minute meeting every morning. Everybody went off and did their thing. They had a line of sight to that. And in today's world, many of them are struggling with having part of their team remote, part of their team in the office, and what that balance looks like for their management structure and how they're doing. So I think it's really important for upper leadership as well to keep an eye on that and have those conversations, right? What are you struggling with in terms of how we're managing our teams now? And as well as, I wanted to jump back just a little bit with making sure that management staff, that HR leaders are aware of what resources are available, right? Whether it's with their behavioral health provider, their EAP providers in the community, so that they can trickle that down throughout their company structure.
Do you think that it's worth, and maybe that's really sort of the substance of what you were just suggesting anyway, that it's worth companies looking at formalizing some of those processes? I know as somebody in a leadership role that my best intentions are often subverted by the chaos of day-to-day reactionary, these things happen, do we have to deal with them? There's not a checklist somewhere that says, here, take 5 minutes to call this person or that person. And so those kinds of good intentions may be things that go by the wayside if there isn't a formal process for them.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It's one thing when you run into someone getting coffee, right, in the kitchen, you can have that 5 minutes. But if you're not, that goes back to the intentionality of it, is you're not going to have a 5-minute coffee break with someone or whatever. So you have to be planful and committed to it. And there's always competing priorities there, like that. And so I think thinking about mental health and people's connectedness has to be a decision and a choice. We know people, just like many organizations have gyms, right? And or have some kind of fitness benefit. I think we have to, which I just want to say also is very important for mental health. But just like we're thinking about what are the tools to have people improve their mental health on a daily basis and be thinking about it, it has to be the same way we're thinking and have historically thought about physical health and what we do to create a healthy workspace, whatever that is.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Steve. But I was just going to add into that I think it's very important for leaders to also know avenues. And like Jill was saying, with physical health, we know what to do, right? If somebody's having a heart attack, if one of your employees presents in your HR office and they're in crisis mode, what do you do, right? Are your HR leaders prepared to take that employee in and have a plan in place to guide them to care? And I think, one of the most simplistic things that I experienced was someone presenting in the office, and staff took them to a private location where they could have an office with the door shut. They called the 1-800 number for their EAP services that offer 24/7 telephonic counseling, and they connected that employee in the moment right then to be able to decompress, be able to process and talk about what was happening then. And then once that occurred, then we can look at next steps, right? What do we need to do to move forward? But they were able to address it in the moment. They were able to connect that person to care. And so I think it's very important to just be proactive versus reactive. And I know you just spoke about that we all are in that reactionary mode. So I think it's very important to keep that front and center.
And to continue with the resource conversation, when everything that Kim talked about just doesn't work, there is a mechanism within the state of New Hampshire that's been around since January 1st, which is called Rapid Response or Mobile Crisis. So there's a number that I'll give you that you can call, and that'll dispatch a clinician and a peer, someone with lived experience with mental health issues, to wherever that crisis is. And that crisis is defined by the person experiencing it. So that could be the workplace. So the HR person could call and say, I'm in over my head here, I need someone here. And people will arrive on scene, find a private place, and do a standardized mental health assessment, and then figure out next steps from there.
There's also, I'm on the board of directors for Samaritans in Massachusetts, which is a suicide prevention hotline. And just not that long ago, this summer, the 988 number, which is a national number, so anywhere in the country, there's now, it's a national, it's not just suicide prevention, it is really a mental health crisis line that people have access to 24/7, which I think is really exciting. You know, it's a really exciting from a stigma perspective and access to BH, because just like we have 911 that you call for a medical emergency, 988 provides that kind of immediate crisis response for a mental health emergency, which happens. And then I also want to make sure we are always thinking, and we've talked about this on the continuum, not every mental health, I think this is part of what makes people worried about dealing with mental health or talking about it. Not every mental health situation is that level of crisis, right? We've talked a lot about the continuum, and as an employer and in the workplace, of course, you're going to have those immediate crises, but there's also other things that people can be doing and thinking about throughout the day. And as individuals, you know, as humans who do work, all of us, there's other things to do. There's other people to talk to, right? There's friends, there's family, there's clergy, there's your PCP, there's all these other things that people don't have to wait until it's so severe. And the more it's talked about as things are progressing, or hopefully not progressing, the better outcomes people have. The sooner it's, and you know, part of the stigma associated with BH often leads people to not seek care as they start to recognize symptoms in themselves, or not to talk about it. And again, just like with many medical conditions, the sooner you start to get the care that is proven to work and help, the quicker the situation is gonna resolve itself. And some mental health conditions are chronic conditions. There's, you know, people will always be dealing with it, but just like people are always dealing with diabetes or different things, there's tools and services that people can use along the way. So it's not you know, I think we have to be really make sure we're not thinking black and white, because I think that's part of what creates this anxiety in a workplace setting, is people think mental health, I'm going to deal with someone who's suicidal, and that's pretty extreme. That's on the very extreme end. Most of us fall in that other, you know, somewhere else on that continuum and need different things.
One of the, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to add one quick thing to what Jill was saying, is that I think it's really important. Like she said, it's not always a crisis, right? But what you want to do on that lower acuity level, which many, many folks fall into, is to get that education and that toolkit set, so that when they have the more in-depth, the more critical things that happen in their lives, they have the tools to pull that out and be able to use them and implement them with what's going on in their life. It's huge too for that parenting perspective, right? And those teens and those children, because there's so many apps and educational points at that lower acuity now that they can get their children engaged in, especially the teens, right? The digital apps are a big deal, but it also allows them to reflect and it allows them to really focus on what's happening in their lives and what their ability is to control that.
We're sort of all the discussions that one would have about mental health right now seem to be within the shadow of the pandemic, because that changed the world so radically not that long ago. But I'm curious, based on the data that you have, is this new? Is there a greater prevalence of mental health or behavioral health challenges in the population now than there was 20 years ago, or do we just have words for it now and we didn't then, or are we dealing with something that always existed?
So I would say yes, right? All of those things are true. That as a country, we've gone through an acute stress episode, and there's always, as soon as the trigger goes away, it doesn't mean the residual impact of living with that acute stress immediately goes away too. So that's one thing. I also think it's the silver lining of the pandemic that because of the situation, people started talking about mental health in a way that has never been discussed so publicly. The fact that, regardless of your political opinion, the fact that in the president's State of the Union address this year, he spoke about mental health, unprecedented. So there's more conversation. And then finally, to what you said, there's more words. And I think this is a really good thing that people have a way to talk about it, that hopefully there's still significant stigma, but hopefully the shame that people have felt and this being seen as an individual person's failing as opposed to a disease and a part of life is slowly changing.
I wonder, we have a question here that I wanted to make sure I got to. This questioner asks, I work for a small organization that is very supportive and understanding. How do you balance generous time off with managing productivity or project loads? Individuals have different needs. How do you frame this in terms of equity? And again, I would open it up to everyone because I feel like each one of you must have a strong perspective on it.
Yeah, I'll start because I had an immediate reaction. It's hard to tell with the question exactly what the question was getting at, but I think it comes down to having people not punch a clock and people be accountable for whatever task that they're charged with. I think that flexibility with this workforce at this time is key, so that people get the job done in a way that they can get the job done, which is very different than punching a clock, from 9 to 5. That was my first reaction to that.
And I think that, we have a heightened sensitivity to what's going on, what's been going on. But I think on the other side of the fence, right, that an employer has to be accountable. They have to have their employees do their job. And so bottom line, it's a balance. And I think now more companies, especially smaller companies, are offering the unlimited time off, right? That's something that they're starting to do instead of offering PTO time. And I think some of us are sitting back. I've had these conversations with family members. What do you do with that, right? Like, I want to be able to take time away, but is it going to look bad if I take time because maybe my colleague's not taking time because they're not in the same situation I am personally? So if there's no defined PTO time and it's kind of an open book, be productive, do what you need to get done, check those boxes off, but then also take care of yourself and make sure that's front and center for you as well. So I think right now that's just a balance. And I think the individual companies, certainly can set some parameters around that. But if it is open, I think those conversations have to happen, right? We're a business, we need to be productive. We're really trying to work together as a team and have those discussions of what that looks like.
And I think the questioner put in the question equity, and so I think of it as parity. Just like you would manage someone with a health condition, thinking the same way about someone with a mental health condition, an acute episode of a mental health condition, and what the expectations are about that. That we, again, it goes back to truly seeing medical and behavioral health as one and the same, that behavioral health is just a condition, a medical condition, a part of wellness, as opposed to something that you have to do something different for or have different expectations around. So if you, whatever your policy is, if someone's going to be out for more than X number of days and you require a doctor's note for a medical condition, perfectly reasonable that you would do that for a behavioral health condition. But you would also want to make sure that if you don't require it for a medical, the flip is also true, right? If you don't require it for a medical condition, that you wouldn't have an added burden for someone who was taking time for addressing a mental health issue.
Is there a role, again, in leadership, you know, at whatever level, you know, supervisors or managers or CEOs, for modeling that kind of behavior themselves too, though, in terms of saying, you know, here's how I take time, maybe I use my vacation time instead of not using it? Or I think that, Kim, it might have been you who told the story about an executive who realized they were putting unusual stress on their employees every Sunday. Was that your story? Share that a bit.
Yeah. So he shared with me that, you know, he was looking inward and saying, what can I do to make some changes? What can I do to make things a little more simplistic for my team? And part of that was he recognized that if he sent emails out on a Sunday, which was his routine, right? And he had no expectation of his team responding or looking at it on a Sunday. But what they read from that was, he's working on Sunday. I need to work on Sunday. I need to reply to these emails. So I think setting the stage as a leader and what your expectations are, and just, you know, following suit with that. So his decision was he did it all on Sunday because that was his day. He wanted to do it, and he sent it all out on Monday. So it just sat in his queue until Monday morning at 8 o'clock. So yeah, just ways to think a little bit differently.
Are there other examples of that, Steve?
I'm just thinking of day-to-day interactions with staff and making sure that you're checking in with people. I had a staff person today that actually is having, she's got 2 little kids at home. She's a single parent. One of the kids is sick. She texted me this morning and said, I'm going to try to work from home. I've got a lot to do today. And I said, don't. You've got a sick little kid. You're a single parent. They can wait till tomorrow. I think that type of thing goes a long way. You know, this is an employee that works hard. I have no problem with her getting stuff done. She needs to take the time and be with the kid. So I think those little things that happen all the time are really important and really speak to what both Kim and Jill were just talking about.
Is that kind of flexibility something that I mean, Jill, you see things from a large organization perspective. Is that something that's beginning to happen in large organizations? Because I don't know that you at least envisioned that. You see that as a sort of small, sort of kind of company kind of flexibility.
You know, I think even within a large organization, you have small teams, right? So I think that is the ideal response, is to say, take the day. And you know, people are, as individual and professionals, are managing their work and their life in whatever way works for them. I also think it's really important with a large or small organization that you have the executives, and then you have the folks at the entry level or lower level positions, and the socioeconomic and societal and equity issues of how their life and what they have in terms of capacity to manage things has to be part of the frame as well. So as Steve said, a single mom trying to balance work and kids is different. And I think that, again, as we think about mental health, we also have to think about equity issues within organizations that we often talk, you know, we have a large commercial business and lots of hospitals, right, that we're the insurer, the health plan for. And at those hospitals, you have the doctors and the chiefs, but you also have the janitors. And so you need to be thinking about what does everybody, that is, you know, the cleaning staff are critically important, but their life and what they need to support their mental health might look different. And I think as an organization, you have to have that be part of the equation in developing what are the right strategies.
So another thing I wanted to circle back to and touch on is, I think much earlier in the conversation, Kim, you mentioned the Live and Work Well site. And I know EAPs were also mentioned a number of times. And I guess that the thing that I'm wondering is, do companies currently promote those effectively? Does everybody in the company know that they have them, or is it the kind of thing that maybe you just gloss over if you're sitting through your benefits presentation, every year, if you're not in crisis, and then when you are, you don't remember that that's a thing. So I guess I'm asking is there a marketing effort that needs to happen within companies for these kind of programs on a regular basis, and how have you seen people do that effectively?
Absolutely. So I think that every company is different, right? They put priorities in different places, and then they have their own avenue of communicating down to their employees. When you have different types of business, different industry, right, it's affected differently. So if you've got a manufacturing plant where people aren't able to necessarily get off the line, some of the elements of an EAP work life are very valuable to those employees because I don't have the time to make phone calls or do some of those things that someone in a different industry might be able to. On the other side of it, when you have people in crisis, many will reach out, they'll ask questions, but many will, like you said, gloss over until the issue's in front of them. And that's not only just you, me, the Joneses, it's even people within the organizations that until it's something they need to really know, they don't engage it. So I think it's really important from a leadership perspective to say, how can I communicate and educate my employees? How can I make access easy and quick for them? So a lot of companies, they will link, tiles on their HR infrastructure to be able to have quick links. They will also make sure that they're putting things up in break rooms, depending on their industry again, right? So if they're wanting to promote their digital apps and options for employees who maybe want to do things on their time, right, at that lower acuity, they can put signs and advertise that out, or they can push emails, or they can put it up on a site. Some companies that are more tech savvy have got blue screens out there and screens that just are advertising all day long, right? So the employees walk by and they see that just rotation going. So it's really a personal choice from a company perspective how they want to do that. But I think it's really important because I think many people don't even realize the amount of offerings that are available to them unless they inquire about it. So any way that a company can push that down internally in their org structure is fantastic based on what their portfolio looks like for their industry.
Yeah, I think it's an untapped resource, as part of, as we've been building the Point 32 health behavioral health model, right? The two legacy organizations had a different approach, insourced and outsourced BH, but we looked at utilization for all, both companies had lots of apps accessible to members, and we found the utilization was shockingly low given the amount of time I felt like I was talking about them, but was really low. And so part of our strategy going forward, both for our employees, but also for our members, is to have that when someone calls the plan looking for BH services, to not assume it's an outpatient therapist in an office or a telehealth provider, but also train our teams to help direct, understand the apps that we have, and help members identify, could this one be the right one for them, and how to engage with that? Because it's, healthcare is so complicated. Like it's so complicated to access care, and behavioral health is even harder. I always say to people, like, I speak health insurance and I find it incredibly complex. So making sure that we have things up front that can help people get to the right place at the right time is really, really important, because it is hard work and it's not intuitive, unfortunately.
It is, and I think too that to the point of being reactionary, right? Unless you need it, you generally don't get on and navigate and look for it. But I do think that from a United Healthcare and an Optum perspective, we have newly enhanced navigation on both of our sites. It's making it much more simplistic. We're really focusing on simplifying the experience for the member. So with that being said, we've got multiple avenues for them to engage, either on the online portfolio, picking up the phone, calling, getting an advocate to help steer them to the right care and what they need.
Steve, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think, the original question was about making sure employees know resources, and one way to go about that, which is kind of out of the box, is to move this out of HR. So getting a cross-section of employees from different departments, different strata, and having them look at data in terms of what is EAP utilization, why are people being terminated, why are people going on performance plans, depersonalized, looking at aggregated data, and then coming up with strategies to help. I mean, it does a couple of things. It keeps the workforce engaged in workforce wellness, but it also advertises what's out there in terms of resources.
One of the things at our organization that we have employee resource groups, or we call them colleague resource groups, right? Affinity groups. We have a wellness one that is highly focused on behavioral health. And so having that group of people, employees, which is very cross-sectional, and I have to say, the questions they ask me keep me on my toes, and I really appreciate their perspective. Having a group of people that have come together specifically to talk about behavioral health and behavioral health in the workplace and as an affinity group, I think is really powerful. And again, normalizes I hate that word normalize, but makes it more regular, a part of life, that this is something that people talk about.
I think that's a great note to get ready to wrap up on. We are just about at the top of the hour. I really appreciate you all and the insights that you brought. I think there's a lot of practical information that not only HR could take away from this, but I think anybody who's in a leadership role in a company. I also love the word wellness that you used at the end, because it definitely also sort of suggests this sort of preventative or ongoing approach to wellness, both physical and mental, that can maybe forestall a greater problem down the road. So once again, thank you all. And Morgan, if you could bring up our closing slide, I will bid farewell to our audience. Thank you, much appreciated. Glad you could join us. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Center for Life Management, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, a Point 32 company, United Healthcare. Recording of today's presentation will be available this afternoon on New Hampshire Business Review's website, nhbr.com. I'm Ernesto Burden, publisher of New Hampshire Business Review, and thank you and be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.